Hey guys, welcome back to the flex joint series here. Today we're talking about our track bar flex joint. Now if you've got an Iron Rock off-road track bar, we've got a flex joint for any of those positions, whether it's on the axle side or the frame side. Now, as you've seen on our website and as you likely would have ordered, you might have our more traditional split poly bushings. Now if these are worn out or if it's just time to get that last little bit out of your suspension, we can upgrade to a flex joint. Like usual, the flex joint is going to have our center ball, our internal races, our end caps, and our hardware. Now also included in here is going to be an Allen wrench. We're doing that because the hardware here takes a much smaller bit. It's going to be a little less likely to have in your standard at-home garage setup, which means we're going to have to be a little bit more careful with our torquing sequence once we get to that part. Let's get into the assembly. So as always, we're going to use our grease. Whatever's in the gun is fine. We're just going to put a little smear on the ball. And then we're going to get on the inside of the races as well. Now with some grease on there, we can get going on the assembly. We're going to grab one of our end caps or washers. You're going to notice it's got a very different one side to the other, and that shoulder is to go to the inside of that joint, so it's going to have a nice flush fitment. And as you can see, kind of common theme here with our flex joints, we have an alternating pattern with the bolts. You're going to have our countersunk holes to send the bolt through, and on the other side is going to be the threads. No nuts on this one. So we'll start the couple of bolts there, get a race on there, and into the male end here, with those two bolts sticking up, we're going to have a nice guide. Oop, let's get the ball first. With those two bolts sticking up, we got a good guide to start that next race. And we'll have to rotate this a little bit so that it sits down in that machining. There we go. Now we got some exposed threads, and we're going to get ready to put the other side on, the other washer. So line up the threaded hole with the thread sticking through, and now we can start threading in here. Now we're not going crazy on it yet. We're just going to get everything started. And as we always mention, as you start getting more hardware in there, this ball is going to get harder to rotate, especially by hand. So let's try and get it as centered as we can before we torque everything down to make for an easier installation into its mount. I'm kind of going back and forth here, as you might be able to tell. The more I tighten these up from side to side, the more it's sinking down into that male end. We can see we're losing that gap between the two, so we know we're just about there. All right, now we can flip it over and send the bolts from the other side. And as we're getting that last one snugged, we start talking about torque. Now, as we said, most of us aren't going to have that bit to put on a torque wrench, so we're just going to have to use what's provided. We do have a torque value, so by all means, if you have that bit, use it. That's the right answer. But if not, we're going to make do here. So, just Jeep guy talking to Jeep guy, here's what I'm going to do to assemble this with the provided tool. I'm going to keep snugging, and I'm going to hold the Allen wrench kind of further out to the end here, so I can gauge my leverage as best I can. And I'm going to kind of snug until I can start feeling/seeing some of that deflection in the tool. Once I've achieved that, I'm going to go on to the next in a crisscross pattern. The other thing worth mentioning is the torque value on these is going to be so low that a lot of torque wrenches, again, that you're probably going to have at home probably aren't going to go that low. And just like when we were snugging it up and watching it kind of suck further into the male end here, And being we don't have those torque values, it's going to be ultra important that we do another pass, kind of keeping the same thing in mind. We're not going crazy on these. We're just going to go until we see a little bit of deflection in the Allen wrench. And after that second pass, we're going to see less and less rotation out of that hardware, and they're going to start feeling about the same when they're snugged up. Okay, and as we're making that second pass here, again, very important that we're doing that crisscross pattern and letting both sides come together equally and trying to get the same value, try and gauge that deflection of the tool as best you can. And at the end of it, once you're all done, if it's too tight to move by hand, perfect. Now, one thing we're also going to notice that's different about this joint versus others is there's no provision for a grease zerk. That's perfectly fine. Again, the material that we use for those internal races is considered self-lubricating. We're just putting some grease in there to make ourselves feel better. So not being able to grease it for the future, not a big deal. And part of that is, you know, the application of it. These aren't going to see that same full rotation misalignment and like our control arms. So we just don't feel that we're going to see nearly the wear or any kind of requirement for scheduled maintenance on these. So once that's all together, we can go ahead and put it in our track bar and yeah, hit the trail and see our improvements. Thanks for stopping by.